welcome to another edition of Root Report. My name is Tom Pagonis. I'm president of the Massachusetts Association of Endodontists, and I'm delighted and honored to have one of the most recognized and one of the most respected colleagues in endodontics with me today, and that, of course, is Dr. Ken Hargreaves. Just to highlight a little bit about his impressive background, Ken completed his undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley and then went on to complete his DDS degree at Georgetown. He stayed on and received his PhD in physiology at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, and then was a staff fellow and senior staff fellow at the NIDCR in the section of anesthesiology and neurobiology. At that point, he returned to clinical education, to clinical dental education, where he received his, I should say, he completed his residency in endodontics at the University of Minnesota. He is a diplomate of the Board of Endodontics, and of course is currently chairman and professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio and holds cross appointments in the Department of Pharmacology, Department of Physiology, the Department of Surgery. And of course, Ken maintains an active research program with interest in pain, analgesia, and his group has published more than 200 papers. He's edited 2 textbooks. And Ken, you maintain a private practice and have found the time to take on the enormous responsibility of being editor of the Journal of Endodontics. So a warm welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Tom, it's great to be here with you and share some thoughts.
That's wonderful. Let's say, if we can, I think especially younger colleagues would be interested to see your progression, your thought process along the way. So obviously you have a very interesting background. You started out, of course, with an interest in neurobiology. And why dental school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm lucky. I'm a Sputnik kid. So growing up, my brother and I we grew up in California. We'd be sitting on the carpet and watched all the Mercury liftoffs and all the Gemini liftoffs, and did all the science fairs that were being promoted at the time, and even built some Estes rocket kits as a kid. So I'd always been interested in science, and at the same time with doing all of those hobbies like that, I felt very comfortable working with my hands. And I was really lucky. My family dentist was a alum from Georgetown, and there's the link there, and really took an interest in what I was doing, and basically allowed me to kind of spend several times in his office, and that really made it quite interesting. So I had a strong interest in dentistry to start with, and eventually after Berkeley, I went to Georgetown for dental school, which was great clinical education. And amazingly enough, Georgetown is only about 8 miles from the NIH, and the NIH is a national jewel. It stands for the National Institutes of Health, and it's involved in really funding almost all basic and clinical research at most universities. So they have a budget in billions and billions of dollars. Some of the world's sharpest minds are there. And in this pandemic, NIH has been very centrally involved in basic research and vaccine trials and all the like. So they're still very relevant. And as a dental student, I had a chance to work there in my summers and stuff. And so, I had this interest in science to start with, and then I had this opportunity and just ran with it. I was just very lucky.
That's wonderful, because I mean, at that point, did you consider after dental school a clinical career at all? Because you went right in, you got your PhD in physiology. So that was
So after dental school, I was practicing as a general dentist on Wednesday nights and weekends on K Street in downtown DC. So right near Embassy Row.
Right.
And really enjoyed that aspect as well. And I was very lucky, because when I was at NIH, I was in the National Institute of Dental Research, as it was known at that time. Mm-hmm. And so my mentors were DDS PhDs that practiced and did research. And one was Ray Dione, who did a lot of the early studies with NSAIDs and dental pain, and followed that with TMD. And I practiced with Ray. I was in the same practice. On Saturdays, we would be
Really?
separate operatories. And so I had mentors that were, I could look up to as clinicians and I could admire as clinician scientists. And, their work is still relevant today.
Of course. It's remarkable even to this day, as as you share these stories with colleagues, that the role of mentors and the people that you meet along the way are so important.
I think that is one lesson that I try to share with everybody, because you end up having a network where you get old enough, you're a mentor for others.
Right.
But at the same time, unfortunately, my mentors are still active and still participate with me, and I come to them with questions or advice, and they have been mentors now measured in decades, and so I am very fortunate.
That's wonderful.
And moving into endo was the same way. So Harold Messer for me is a very strong mentor.
That's that's sort of the question, because at that point you had completed your PhD. You had spent like 4 years at the NIDCR at NIH.
Yeah.
And then you made a turn. I mean, at that point, did you consider industry? Did you consider stopping your education and going on and getting a faculty appointment and doing research?
Not really. I felt that, so the backstory here is, in the practice I was in, no one wanted to do endo. Everyone wanted to do Crown and Bridge. So I'm the most junior guy, the youngest kid, and so I got with the endo and found that, again, I really enjoyed the dexterity challenges in endo, and realized it's really a thinking person's game. Your most important instrument is between your ears for endo.
I remember that.
And I really found that I enjoyed that, and it matched my own research interests in pain. And I had opportunities to eventually give CE lectures, and found that the endodontists in the audience were the ones who were asking really what I thought to be the most pertinent questions and really interesting questions. And that door was open. And so there was an opportunity in Minnesota, and Harold Messer, again, a DDS PhD, endodontist, recruited me there. And while not widely known in our field, Minnesota is a hotbed for neuroscience and pain and drug addiction research. And so it was an opportunity that I could come in and do my training. I was there for 7 years and really learned a lot. Was able to start up my first lab independently while I was in practice and teaching. And I came to love the university, and the people of Minnesota were just amazing. But frankly, a California boy in Minnesota is kind of tough.
I know, right? Yeah, but I have an interesting anecdote story. I don't know if you realize this, but I went to the University of Minnesota as a dental student. I graduated.
Yeah. Cool.
Our paths crossed. I don't think you remember it, but that's okay. I mean, I was just yeah. Oh no, this is a great story, and I've been saving it for it just to tell you. Is that when I graduated from dental school, I stayed on at the University of Minnesota. I did a 1 year. It was an AAGD program, so I started practicing. And then I sort of developed an interest in endo as well. So one day after work or before work, I just drove in. I walked into the department. I remember the infrastructure, that central office. Then there's an office on either side of of that. So I said, well, gee, I'm here to speak to about a residency doing graduate work. And I spoke to Jim Jensen. He was and another faculty member. You know what they said? Both of them. You need to speak to Ken Hargreaves. I said, well, okay. I said, that's great. I'll do it. So we sat down. You don't remember, but you were very gracious, and you're partially responsible for getting me started. So
that's an awesome story, and I'm embarrassed to say that.
No, that's okay. I think
it must be a marker of advanced age. That's all.
No. I just, I think the bigger story here is what you said before, is that if once we have the opportunity sometimes to advise people, younger people, the impact can be tremendous. And so
I'm sure you've just shared this story, but it's the same thing with myself. I mean, you don't really know when you interact with people the potential impact, the change. I mean, the the opportunity that Harold Messer gave me to come to Minnesota and do my endo training and then stay on as faculty, that not only changed my life, that changed my family's life. And forever will I be grateful to that opportunity.
That's wonderful to hear. And of course, yeah, Harold Messer was there. He was, he was running even the, I'm not sure if he was running the pre-doctoral, but I remember him very well as well.
Yeah, Mahmoud El-Deeb was there at the time. He was the
Yeah.
program director. He was my
Nice.
director.
Yeah, nice man. Well, that's great. I'm glad you went to, I'm glad you went to Minnesota, and I agree with you completely in terms of, the people in the Midwest and whatnot. So Ken, at that point, you had, it sounds like you had a great experience in Minnesota. Did you ever at that point consider, you know what, I'm just want to be a clinician? I did this, I want to go into private practice and do it.
To be honest, I've always, so I have probably a different view of being a clinician versus academician. I tell my students that I actually have a job where I'm paid to be ignorant. I get a paycheck every month for what I don't know. And the reason for that is it allows me to ask questions that I find interesting. And so doing research is, for me, it's an addiction. It's not a passion, it's a way of life. And so I've always enjoyed treating patients. I've always enjoyed being in the clinic and working with clinicians and all of that. But I've done it from the perspective of a clinician scientist, that to me, if I can treat 100 patients, that's awesome. But if I can train endo residents that each treat thousands of patients, where's the bigger impact?
Wonderful. Yeah.
And so for me, that's always been the perspective. I enjoy patient contact. I enjoy clinical care. I think it's terrific, but I really, for me, I enjoy that option of being, like you say, hired to be ignorant. And
I love that. I have to remember that. So at that point, you decided, obviously, if we go forward, you decided to, to get a faculty appointment as a program director. And these opportunities don't come up that often. How did you pick San Antonio? What was your thought process with going down?
Well, winter is optional in San Antonio.
I was gonna say that.
That was one factor. I went from the north end of I-35 to the south end of I-35 across the United States. San Antonio had a really great reputation. It was a very strong school, actually still is a very strong school, had a strong DDS PhD program. It probably had one of the larger endodontic departments in the country in terms of full-time faculty. The structure of San Antonio is that we don't have a basic science department. So we don't have a department of oral biology, but instead every clinical department can hire their own PhD scientists. And so that was very attractive to me, to be able to run a department that had a very strong clinical focus, but build up its research program. And there's an attitude about Texas that's crazy, and that is they just can do. And so there's this remarkable ability that they show no fear in building new things and trying new things and having philanthropy come in and make major contributions. And so I've been very fortunate with all of that. And then there was a good pain group that was already in San Antonio. So John Rue was on the clinical side doing his clinical trials, and Chuck Milam, who was a DDS PhD oral surgeon, eventually became chair of the department, was doing some incredible early work on the biology of pain. So there was this feeling like there was a group established. The school was structured really well. It was in a great environment, and finally it didn't have winter. Now summer is mandatory. We don't have an option about summer, but winter is optional.
That's very interesting, because I had the impression that you went down and had to do a lot of work on the infrastructure, but you had something already established and attracted you to it.
Yeah, the infrastructure, I mean, we, like every other clinical grad program, if you think about from the early to mid 90s, endo was making huge technological changes. So we had introduction of microscopes, we had the introduction ultrasonics and all the microsurgical instruments. We had the beginnings of a commercial NiTi rotary systems. We had just transformational changes in the clinic. So there was a lot of infrastructure in the clinic that we were doing in San Antonio, but honestly, grad programs across the country have been doing that, and we haven't stopped. We're still doing, we have in our clinic right now, we have a 3D printer for surgical stents for doing, targeted endodontic microsurgical procedures. We do, active stem cell transplant studies in patients doing regenerative endodontics. So we have, and all the modern irrigation systems. So that never changes. There's been a huge and continual investment in clinical infrastructure. What we didn't have as a department was a robust research infrastructure. And that was really the big area of growth.
So tell us a little bit about your team now. And of course, the area of research, it seems timely what you're doing now in terms of
thank you. So you used exactly the right word. So everything that I do is team. So if it's pathways, with all the editors and with Lou Berman as a partner, Steve Cohen as our guiding angel, that's a team. If it's the Joe, we have more than a dozen associate editors and more than 400 members of scientific advisory board. That's a team. And if you're talking about the department, that's also a team. So I'm surrounded by teams, and I think that keeps you young, and it keeps you productive and creative and focused. And there's something special about really good teams. So, I'm very fortunate that we have in the department, 5 full-time endodontists. 4 of us have PhDs, and the 5th is actually getting her PhD. So we really have a commitment to the full scope of endodontics, where we are all diplomates. We are active in training dental students, but really active in training in the residency program. And at the same time, we all partner in a team science lab. So our laboratories are, we're fortunate. You have space in Texas, so we have a lot of space for labs. And we have 7 names on the door, because in addition to my 5 endodontic faculty, including myself, we have 2 straight PhD basic scientists. And so we actually totally have more employees on the research side than I have on the clinical side, because all of us are active. We have multiple technicians and postdocs and graduate students. The department has a full-time clinical nurse, and she does our clinical research. So she's doing informed consents or writing IRBs or that sort of thing. So when we're doing a study on novel treatments for endodontic pain is a big feature for us. Erin, our nurse, is actually there writing the IRB and doing the informed consent and all of that. So because we're embedded in team environment, I'm convinced that we can accomplish more than just one person could on their own. So you and I are talking right now, but the reality is 20 minutes ago, I was in the lab meeting with like 40 people. And we do that every single Thursday at 8 o'clock. And this week we were talking about clinical trials on novel analgesics that had never been used before in endo patients, where we're actively recruiting patients for this. And Vanessa Krepa is leading that trial, and it's spectacular.
Yeah. Vanessa's wonderful, right? That's great. That's great. Ken, just sort of a tangent to that, to these programs, funding, of course, the traditional funding avenues. Or what about industry? Do you work with industry? Do you collaborate with industry at this point? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think those are really good points. So in terms of funding, probably our major source of funding is the government. So NIH grants or Department of Defense contracts. The AE Foundation has been a godsend, particularly for helping our residents do their research and for faculty to make that transition early in their career to get government grants. And I'm now in my 3rd decade of supporting the foundation. So I'm a strong advocate and admire the foundation and what they do now to provide care to those who need it most. I think that's been a huge advance in the last few years. Industry support is something for us that we definitely appreciate. It's not something that we are actively soliciting. Oftentimes the support is more of an educational perspective than a research perspective. But the opposite is also true. So from the work that's been done in the department, we now have several patents on new molecules for treating pain. And so we're actually spinning those out into industry. So rather than just, doing contract work for industry. So I think that it goes both ways. But yeah, today's environment is complex because it's not inexpensive to run a grad program, and it's not inexpensive to run a research group, and I'm not Daddy Warbucks, so it's you're constantly writing grants.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is the term soft money? Is that correct? It's hard to live on that. That's why
it is hard to live on that. But I can say that just like anything else, when you do your first root canal or you do your 10,000th root canal, there's a learning curve. And the same thing is true with writing grants, that if you've been doing it long enough, and in a team science environment, I'm not submitting any grant until my colleagues have taken their chainsaw and gone through it a few times. And so it means that the final submitted grant is at a probably more competitive position than it would have been if I was just doing it by myself.
Terrific. So in terms of just digress to industry again, have you ever done, for example, have you ever agreed to a sponsored research program, or I know you have a technology transfer office, a licensing agreement with some of these novel therapeutics that you're working on?
So we really haven't worked with companies in doing evaluation of endodontic instruments or something, general wave or chromium CT or things like that. We really have not gone at that level, and that hasn't been a major focus for us. But it's something that, as clinicians, we looked very, very carefully at all of those studies and papers. And I'll say, we're fortunate that in San Antonio we have 2 grad programs. Since the Air Force program is at Wilford Hall. And so if you think about it, the Air Force program and our program we have no competition. We don't compete for residents. We don't compete for patients. We don't compete for faculty. So we've been joined at the hip for decades. And the Air Force spend their first year with us. And the Air Force faculty actually come out and teach classic lit to our residents and their residents. And in turn, we share a lot of research ideas. So, a lot of the recent work in targeted endodontic microsurgery, even the term TEMS, comes from the Air Force Endo program.
Yeah.
And we've been very fortunate to work with them as true, academic partners. And that's how, we ended up with 3D printers and how to use the software programs to design our own splints and stuff is to basically follow their groups. So, sometimes interacting with industry also means interacting with fellow colleagues in academia. And that's been very valuable for us.
Sure. That sounds very, very, very impressive, Ken. I do want to just sort of go over, as I think about it, you started out in, you're in San Antonio, you started out California, Northern California, then you went to metropolitan DC, Minnesota, San Antonio. What has that done to your sports allegiance? I mean, are you a fan of professional sports or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So down in San Antonio, I'm a diehard Spurs fan.
Spurs fan.
And so for the first 20 years or so, this was a great place to live because it's a small community. We're not that large as a city, although it's been grown quite a bit in the last 20 years. But to see, to go to your local grocery store and you see, David Robinson pushing a shopping cart. It's a pretty amazing experience.
I would think so.
So for sure, Spurs. And when I say diehards fan, I'm more on the dying side right now because we're clearly at a regrowth, and it's the new team is great, but it's not quite where we were. And then spending 11 years in Washington D.C., for us it was the Redskins. And that was during the time of Joe Gibbs coaching and 2 Super Bowls and John Riggins as the running back. And, the whole what really I think divides DC maybe is politics, but what brings DC together is football. And so that was a great sport too. So yeah, very much enjoyed the Vikings when we were in Minnesota. So if you look at the win-loss record in the last 20 years, it's been pretty sad. I've managed to consistently pick losing teams to be fan of. But, that just tells me I have to keep my day job.
No, but they appreciate they appreciate your loyalty. So Ken, were you up there when the Minnesota Twins won the second World Series? Were you there? Yeah, that was fun. That was
amazing. That was just such a great team, and the was the Homer Hankies, the white Hankies that the audience would play or show up when.
I still have mine. I still have one.
You do? Oh, that's.
I was going to frame it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an active part of the game. If you're the opposing side trying to hit a ball and all you see is a wall of white behind you, it's a way that the fans can participate.
I think they sort of started away because they went on to other professional sports. There were towels, and it just sort of seemed to die down. That's great.
It's a great part of life.
Absolutely. So Ken, we can't go to a commercial break, so I'll change the conversation.
Okay.
Talk about the JOE. How did that happen?
So that was just one of those fortunate things that Hank Trowbridge had run the JOE for a long time and really grew it to be an exceptional journal. And when he decided to step down, there was an open call for people to consider serving as the editor. And I was really attracted to that because, again, being someone who sees themselves as a clinician scientist, I thought that was a way I could contribute to the specialty, that we could ensure, because the editorial vision we have for the Joe is that every single issue of the journal has to have papers in there that's relevant for your patient in 15 minutes. So, if we're talking about new ways of removing separated instruments or gaining anesthesia or doing, cone beam CT versus traditional imaging, all of those methods are of relevance to your next patient, and every issue has to have those papers. And then at the same time, we have to set the stage. We have to take ownership of our own future. So we have to publish papers that will be relevant in 5 or 10 years. So, any one paper or any one issue of the Joe could have, again, endodontic microsurgical techniques or the dynamic navigation systems or cone beam CT, at the same time talk about the importance of growth factors that are embedded in dentin for differentiation of stem cells. So we are, if you will, trying to provide access to the latest current knowledge for our fellow clinicians, and to set the stage for the future of the specialty to ensure that it's strong and stable and continues to grow.
As you think about it, and I appreciate you sharing your vision, it's wonderful and very impressive. Do you think about things like increased readership, impact factor, eigenfactor, which I just learned about actually, and even branding? Yeah, I just learned about that. Do you think about those things?
Yeah, those are issues. So wearing my science hat when I'm publishing our research group, we really focus on journals that have high impact, because that really plays a role in terms of grants being funded and the like. When you're talking though about clinical societies like ours, the impact factor doesn't really do a good job of measuring the impact of that journal. And the reason is that if you think about it, we have 2 primary journals of endodontics. It's not that large of a field. And so the impact factor is basically the numerator is the number of citations that, say, an article has generated or a journal has generated. And then denominator is the number of papers that have been published. Well, if we're in a limited field, we have a limited possibility of citations. And it's only the articles that go beyond endodontics that often generate large numbers of citations. So as a clinician, Krasner-Rankow's paper on finding canal orifices is amazingly important paper. I mean, when we do root camp with our first year residents, that's like the second paper they read. It's really critical. If you know your pulp chamber floor anatomy, you are automatically a better clinician to start with. But at the same time, it has not generated a large number of citations because it's limited in its scope to endodontics. So I think of clinical impact and impact factor as two separate things that the journal has to hit both. We want to have a good impact factor, but we recognize that the clinical impact of a paper oftentimes is more important than the impact factor itself. Where the journal really receives large numbers of citations is when we touch a topic that has relevance to many other fields. So for example, we published in June of 20, probably one of the first review articles on dental implications of COVID-19. And I believe that paper's been cited several hundred times, maybe 600 times in just the year and a half since it was published. But the reason for that, of course, is it had implications far beyond just our field.
Ken, in terms of authorship, are you able to sort of, off the top of your head, break down in terms of percentage, how many are North American or US published authors and what percentage are global authors?
Yeah, so when I first started, it was dominantly US based, and I would say maybe 3/4 of the articles were North America. Now, of course, it's much more international, much more global, and I take that as a wonderful sign of the growth of endodontics as a specialty around the world. That we now have authors that are doing very, very nice contributions, regardless of what country they're from. And so, yeah, I think its growth in international authorship reflects the global growth of endodontics, and that makes our entire field stronger.
Over the course of time, and I look at the table of contents, of course, you made terrific adjustments, and I think it was 2016 you introduced the regenerative endo as a separate. I also noted, I think it's for a couple of years now, you've had editorials. How's that working out? Are you happy with the progress of having the editors sort of talk about the?
It's funny because the AAE does a great job of surveying members on broad numbers of topics, and the Joe comes in as a survey item quite often. And one of the feedbacks that we were getting from members was that a lot of times it was difficult for them to put a study in context. So if it was a study that was, say, using artificial intelligence to interpret cone beam CT images, which I think is really going to be a major growth area for us, particularly when we're trying to interpret fractures or something like this. If you're not in the AI lingo, which I'm not, it's difficult to understand why that article is important. Or if it's something that's more cell biology based, or if it's something that is looking at the impact of material composition or flute designs on separation of instruments. If you're not into a lot of engineering concepts, sometimes that you don't necessarily appreciate the significance of the paper. And to be honest with you, I'm subject to that as well. I certainly struggle with a lot of topics. So what we try to do with the monthly editorial is each of us takes a paper that we're really interested in, and we've tried to make the editorial board as excuse me, as broad as possible. So we have folks in practice, we have folks in academics, but even across that, we have people with lots of interest in microbiology or immunology or material science or irrigations and the like, nanoparticles. And they take a paper and they basically write a 1-paragraph summary of, why is that paper of interest? How was it done? What is it? What was the interpretation? And then more broadly, how does that actually fit? Is it one more, brick on the layer? Is it incremental, or is it, basically something that's really new? So I can give you something that's really new is a couple papers we've had now that are doing pulpal transplants. So you basically are taking a third molar from a patient and dividing the pulp and using that to seed, to grow pulp in teeth that were otherwise pulpless, that were, had a diagnosis of pulpal necrosis. And when those papers were first submitted, I thought that was like science fiction. I just had trouble understanding it, but we're getting more and more of them. And it's really an interesting area. But I think that's a good example of something that's not just on the cutting edge, it may be on the bleeding edge of what we can do. And the editorial can kind of put it in context and say, it's not just this paper. We've seen, 4 other papers reporting the same thing. And this is the potential implications of the study. And this is also the limitations of the study, where the field needs to go. So I think the editorials are kind of interesting. It's always done at the last minute because we can't write the editorials until that issue's been put together. And then, of course, once the issue is put together, Elsevier wants to get it out as fast as possible. Yeah. So it's always a really fast turnaround for that. And I was saying earlier how important teams are. That the associate editorial board is a great team. They pull that together every month with just a couple days notice.
Yeah, so you and the editorial board, I think you have 12 on the associate editors. Ken, are they selected by you? How is that process? Is there a term that they serve? Because underneath that, of course, you have reviewers, and we can talk about that.
Right. So we're all on revolving 3-year terms that can be renewed, okay. And we have the opportunity to continue if you still are interested and able to contribute. We do a general call for this. So this last year, we've actually recruited 3 new associate editors, and one associate editor, Rob Rhoda, is retiring from the editorial board this month. And Rob is just an incredible person. He's an incredible past president, but he has a passion for endodontics. He's just amazing. I really will miss him. And in turn, we have Frank Setzer as a new editor, yes. Associate editor, Ariadne Letra, and Anita Amino-Shairi. And they all come in with really wonderful combinations of skills and skill sets. So that, we try to select people that are not just interested and have some experience, but that it broadens the experience. So if everyone on the editorial board is a microbiologist, we're a weak journal because we do a lot more than just microbiology. So we try to have folks on the editorial board that cross the spectrum of papers that are submitted to the journal.
In terms of reviewers, do you know how many you have off the top of your head in terms of?
We have more than 400. I think it's somewhere around 460, something like that.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And just like we were talking about with authorships, the reviewers are really literally from around the world. And they're selected, they're nominated usually by associate editors. And they are, selected based on their area of expertise and interest. And as we open up new fields that are being published in the Joe, we try to solicit new reviewers for that. So for example, with AI, we're now starting to have, we've even had recently a review on AI, artificial intelligence, yes. In endodontics. And so, that means we're going to get more papers in that area. We need to solicit more experts in that area to make sure that, the papers have value to our readers.
It's really a crowning jewel for us, and I attribute it all to you, Ken. I seriously do. I think the leadership aspect of this is so important. So go ahead, Ken.
I think it's all teams. It's that I really have a sincere belief in that. The team, if you can pull together a good team, they can do amazing things that no one person could do. And the Joe is still evolving, it's still growing. I'd love to talk about Joe Digital in a minute. That's what we're gonna do. But I think the stature of the journal is really a true reflection of the teams that share their passion to get this information out to our colleagues.
What's a week or a day like in the workflow of Ken Hargreaves? I mean, you have the responsibility of being part of a robust research program. You have your department. You have the JOE. I'm just curious how you spend your day. You're busy.
Yeah. So some days are somewhat chaotic. So we're recording this on a Thursday. So I will have nothing but Zoom meetings today. My first Zoom meeting was at 7 a.m. My last one will finish around 6 p.m. And it's literally one Zoom meeting after another on completely different topics. And that's just, I try to cram as much on meetings as I can on Thursdays to free up the rest of the week. Wednesdays tend to be my big writing day, so I try to spend Wednesdays doing that. Mondays is more clinical. We have case presentations or clinical topic seminars with our residents. And then it's also seasonal. So from January to about March or April, I do pulp biology with the senior residents, and we time it that place in the curriculum so they're just done with pulp biology, and then the next week they take the written exams. So we try to do that. And then the first 2 months of July and August with first year residents, Asma Khan and I do root camp with the incoming residents, and just spend that time to try to get them into the literature and doing a lot of techniques that they've not done with extracted teeth, recovery of separated instruments, perf repairs, all of that sort of stuff.
Sounds great.
It's fun. I'm not a good person for doing the same thing every single day. That just doesn't work for me. So it's a little chaotic and unpredictable, but it works for me.
You're obviously very, very happy, and it certainly does work for you. And I know just a moment ago you expressed with some enthusiasm at JOE Digital. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What are your goals for that? And I know that's a broad question, but we can hone in.
So I'm part of a dying breed. I'm a boomer.
Well, I'm with
and the paper, I do everything writing now electronic, of course, but it wasn't too long ago that my final draft of a grant was always printed and then reading it out. So that's a generational thing. When I look at my own sons who are, late 20s, early 30s, if I send them an email, it'll take them a week before they look at their email account. If I want to talk to them, I have to text.
Digital,
and,
right?
Exactly. And they are they live in a digital world that is not necessarily my natural world. And if you look at students younger than that, they're even more inclined to be completely digital. And so, if we're going to continue to serve our growing majority of clinicians that are more digitally inclined, then the journal has to evolve to serve that need. And the digital versions really allow you to have a completely different way of thinking about things. So for example, if you pick up the December issue of the Joe, what you read is a collection of articles that have nothing in common except they were available for the December issue of the Joe. In other words, we divide the articles out by time. Wouldn't it make more sense to be able to divide the articles out by topic? And so if you're interested in surgical procedures, here are the top 20 articles that have the highest numbers of citations that the Joe has done in the area of surgery, or in the area of retreatment, or in the area of diagnosis. So you then can sort your articles based on impact or based on recency, how recent they were published, but they're all sharing the same topic. And the digital thing allows you to rearrange the article content of the journal, not just by time, which is the traditional way we do it in print, but also by topic or by number of downloads, because that gives you an idea of what your colleagues are most interested in, which is a faster measure than, say, impact or citations. So it allows us to rearrange the articles of the content of the journal in ways that the user wants. It also would allow us to deliver the articles to the user in a format that they want. So maybe they want it on smartphones or iPad minis or something like that, rather than eating up 2 feet of shelf space back in your office somewhere when you're actually in your operatory and you want to know, what was that monoclonal antibody that was associated with cervical resorption, Gary Meyer's interesting studies. So yeah, I think the whole digital thing is a recognition that we are well deep into a generational shift. of who will be the dominant members of our association, and our job is to continue to keep endodontics strong as a specialty, and we need to evolve to ensure that we can serve the needs of our growing majority of members.
Absolutely, and that's even as we look retrospectively at residents that go through programs, they're also a little bit different, and they learn a lot better. I mean, even myself, it got to the point where the resident can reach me anytime on my phone, which is fine with me. I'm fine with that. They could send me a text if I wasn't there and ask a question. But in terms of what you were talking about, in terms of the benefit for the user, this is fascinating. It sounds great. Would you consider an interactive component? Would you consider the author going on and doing something, and then you can have education potential?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of Elsevier's journals that I covet. I don't know anything about the field, but I love the way they do their journal, is Gastro. And so Gastro does just that. They have podcasts, they have video interviews, they have online CE that's done. You can download how-to videos, much like our Live Learning Center. So, if you're interested in surgery and you're a member of AAE, there's no reason why what's being delivered to you is not just the Joe, but how about Live Learning Center lectures on surgery as well. So, we have a lot of content from a lot of experts in the AAE, and there's no reason why we can't amalgamate that to better serve our members. And Gastro, I think, has done a really good job in the area of gastroenterology, of course. I guess in the mouth, we're at the upper end of their interest, but as a journal, they really are doing, I think, a good job of being able to deliver multiple digital content. And I would love that our association, has offerings where we deliver multiple sources of digital content to our members in a seamless way.
Do you think the evolution of the digital JOE will be the primary source? Do you see it now as a supplement? I mean, it's hard to say. Would this evolve completely into a digital form?
I think that's a really great question, and I don't have a good answer for you. I can tell you that I subscribe to many other journals, and I only get them digitally. And so, that I feel very comfortable with that as a format. It's actually much easier to search. It's much easier to find. If you're going to use something into a lecture, you're already in a digital format, so it's easy to incorporate into, say, PowerPoint or whatever you want to use for your presentation app. So I think, yeah, their evolution of digital makes a lot of sense.
Ken, what do you think the impact is now? I mean, you have to work with Elsevier, and you have to work with a publisher, and this evolution, this change to digital. Are there issues of copyright? And I notice also in the JOE, the traditional JOE, you offer authors options for open access, for example. How do you think that'll evolve? Who will own the copyright?
Yeah, I think it's well, in terms of our publisher, we are fortunate working with Elsevier.
Say not the editor, the publisher. I apologize. Yeah.
No, that's all right. So they have thousands of journals. So they are solving these problems. That's their job number one. So we have a good partner who has a lot of expertise, and we really have a good relationship with them. In fact, in terms of open access and copyright, I had a call with them just last week on that topic. So yeah, it's a growing area of presentation of material. The Joe actually has done open access and for a number of topics for more than 10 or 15 years. So if you think about the symposias that we've had with pediatric dentistry, with perio, the ones with IDR and regenerative endodontics, those special issues are all open access. To Elsevier's credit, they gave us free open access during the pandemic on anything related to COVID. And so all of our COVID-related papers are instantly open access. There's no barriers there at all. And in turn, on the AAE COVID website, we were depositing articles from other journals that were of relevance to endodontics, all completely free and open access. So for example, the Journal of Hospital Infection and I think Immunity, not a journal I normally follow, had an incredible paper, and this was about April of 2020, on the effects of sodium hypochlorite versus chlorhexidine versus hydrogen peroxide for inactivating SARS-CoV-2. Well, that's a hugely important topic for us, because we really want to know how well our irrigants work. And that's available on the AE website, open access, courtesy of Elsevier, and the publisher, the editor of that journal. So, a lot of times open access, particularly when you have, the public health crisis that we face as clinicians, it's not just the personal health exposure, it's making sure that, our office environment, our staff, and critically our patients are healthy as possible. And I think that's leading now to, new areas of research. So I'm very interested in virucidal water lines. The idea that if you're using ultrasonics, not just or say aerosol generation in general, that may not just be a delivery of viral particles out into the operatory, but it could be an opportunity to inactivate the viral particles. So there's a large amount of literature, and this came out of, I think, the Air Force back in the 80s and 90s, that 0.5% sodium hypochlorite in water lines does an incredible job of inactivating viruses. Now, back then they didn't look at SARS-CoV-2, but we already know from the more recent literature that will indeed inactivate SARS-CoV-2. And that concentration of hypochlorite is Dakin solution.
Dakin, World War I.
World War I, already approved by the ADA as an oral irrigant. And so, you have these, open access, I think, has a really important feature in terms of getting immediate distribution of information to clinicians, particularly during healthcare crises like the one that we're hopefully exiting from. The open access also has a social aspect. Particularly in Europe, but also in other countries, there are government regulations that basically say that if your research was funded by the government, you must publish open access. And the notion is that if the government is using money from the people to fund this research, shouldn't the people have access to that knowledge? And so, there are formal mandates from countries, not all, but from countries, to have their investigators publish in open access format. So the JO has to be adaptive to that need as well. And then finally, I think open access really does serve a good need in terms of just transmitting knowledge and information. So, we, in the conventional version of the JO, our primary readers are, of course, endodontists or dentists interested in endodontics. But wouldn't it be nice if we could expand that to the general population and have articles on why it's important to save teeth?
Yes.
What's the difference between an endodontist and general dentist, and why would a general dentist refer to a specialist for treatment? What is special about endodontics? So there's content that we could generate and have available for general folks that are interested in, all of a sudden, what's a root canal do? What is this thing about stem cells and root canals? Where does that work? Why would I want to consider that? There's a lot of people that are concerned about anything artificial in their bodies, and the one feature of Rogendo that is of interest to a lot of patients is this fact that it's natural. You're using your body's natural cells to regrow that tissue. And, we can debate whether that constitutes the natural pulp-dentin complex or not. But the reality is that, in a great number of cases, the patients are responding to pulp sensibility testing, and the apical periodontitis is healed and the tooth continues to develop. And so from a patient's perspective, this is an acceptable form of treatment. So I think the long-winded answer to your question.
No, this is great. I mean,
is that I think it does have a lot of value. I think it has value during public health emergencies. It has value because some countries mandate this for open access to their population. And it has value because we can start to think about engaging other audiences that we typically don't focus on with the traditional Joe.
So I was going to ask you what the next chapter is for Ken Hargreaves, but it sounds like you already have at least an outline, and you're on it.
Yeah, I really enjoy on balance everything that's going on. I enjoy interacting with teams. To me that's an essential part of my day. I enjoy working with residents and dental students. Although I guess I don't remember all my dental students I've talked to. I think the challenge for me is to try to do a decent job on this stuff, to keep up with my own students who are always pushing me and saying, have you read this paper, or have you tried this method, or what do you think about this? And so it's a vibrant life that I get to live, and I'm very fortunate for that.
I think it's very important what you just said, and anyone involved in academics, that if you show up in lit review and you're not prepared, they know.
Yeah, the embarrassing thing is when I'm asking things about recent papers to my residents, and the paper hasn't been published yet.
Yeah.
And then you realize that that's a mistake. So I just have to remember what month am I in, and what's come out versus what's in press.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Ken, I really want to thank you for your time. I'm happy to go on. I know you're a very busy man, and I appreciate you taking the time. I want to congratulate you on your ongoing success. I very much enjoyed our conversation, and I also want to thank you what you do for our specialty.
Tom, thank you so much for doing what you're doing, for being able to, broaden the audience for endodontics. And hopefully we're going to have not just endodontists and residents that are engaged with your podcast, but hopefully other folks that will learn more about the importance of saving the natural tooth, and the fact that we can do this in a predictable way by making patients comfortable and providing the best level care. And I think that's what unites our specialty, but it also is what makes us special, is that we can save the natural tooth.
Perfect. Thanks again, Ken. Be well, and I hope to see you soon.
I look forward to that. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.